Good morning. Congratulations to all the parents who have survived the summer, sending your kids back to school, celebrating. Welcome to students who are rolling into town at one of the various colleges and universities, and greetings to those joining us at the O1 at Crossroads and Vernon Hills, or at home. So no Highland Park today. Highland Park campus, once a year, the city of Highland Park has this event, and it closes down, a big art festival, and it closes down the campus. You can't get to it, and you can't park, and so they have their service in a park, and the Holy Smokers are cooking for them. So right now you're wondering, well, why am I here? I could be at a park and have the Holy Smokers cooking, but too late. Anyway, good to have you all here. And go Cubs and go Bears and all that at the end of August, early September stuff. So the question for the day is, what does it mean to be successful? And by that definition, are you a success? So this is one of the big questions. This sort of is one of the big six. I have sort of routinely paraded these questions in front of you and said, everybody's life is sort of shaped by their thinking, their worldview is framed by answers to these six questions. Now, not everybody sort of consciously looks at the questions to figure out if they have answers to them, but everybody has some sort of animating answer, and sometimes they're contradictory and they're bad answers. But the first question is, what ultimately matters? Like, what's most important? Who's most important? Who is my God? What am I organizing my life around? Second question, who am I? Third question, where did I come from? Fourth question, what's expected of me? Fifth question, what happens when I die? And sixth question, where do I look for answers to the first five questions? Like, what do I trust to give me answers to these questions? So the question we're looking at today is sort of adjacent to the fourth question, which is, what's expected of me? So, okay, what am I supposed to be doing with this life that I've been given? How am I supposed to understand my role in everything? And am I accountable to God for something? And if so, what happens when I die? Do I face an audit? What does success look like? What am I supposed to do with the stuff that is sort of under my control while I'm here? So we're asking this question in part because it sort of dovetails with the whole Restart series. We're asking it also because it is the big question behind the parable of the talents. So this Restart series, we've been basing it on the parables, and I have tried to make it clear that the parables are not kids' stories. The parables are not Aesop's fable with a spiritual twist. The parables are not inspirational or motivational messages. The parables are not stories Jesus told to people. They're stories Jesus told about people. He smuggles some big ideas under our radar, and then it goes off. It's a bomb. And we end up oftentimes much later going, oh my goodness. Like, I think he meant this, and I think he meant this about me. I mentioned this morning to Sherry that I felt a little bad. So last night we have Saturday night service, and I said, this parable in particular has got a lot of TNT in it. I mean, it's concussive. If it gets into your heart, you drop your guard, then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I did not completely appreciate what I was taking in. So a few weeks ago we started this. We were in Luke chapter 10. We were looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan. Last week, we were in Luke 15, and we were looking at the parable of the lost sheep. Next week, it's Matthew 13, and we're in the parable of the hidden treasures. Today, it's Matthew 25, and we're looking at the parable of the talents. So just by way of overview, I was planning to stay in Luke. So there's a lot of the stories that appear in one gospel appear in other gospels. So Jesus didn't, there's 4 gospels, and Jesus didn't simply tell these stories one time, right? It wasn't captured and then posted on YouTube. It didn't go viral, Instagram. It wasn't covered by whoever, the New York Times or the BBC. So he traveled from town to town for several years, and he told a lot of the same stories. He was teaching. He was a rabbi. So he'd go into a town, a group would gather, and he'd tell a story. He would teach. And sometimes the messages are slightly different. So we have the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous sermon ever given, recorded in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. We have a very similar sermon, which we call the Sermon on the Plain, which is recorded in Luke chapter 6. There's a lot of overlap, but there's some differences. And when it comes to the parable of the talent, that's technically found in Matthew. So there is a parable of the minas, M-I-N-A-S, which is sometimes referred to as the parable of talent in Luke. And I was going there, I actually prepared to speak on that, and then thought, no, let's do the parable of the talents. And so they're slightly different. So Luke's parable, which we're not looking at, is when Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. So it's several days before the Holy Week. And he tells a story about a man, a master, some sort of king, some sort of wealthy person, who has 10 servants, and he gives each of his servants 1 minas. M-I-N-A-S, this refers to roughly 2 months, 3 months' wages. So he gives them this money, and he goes away. And then when he comes back, one of them has taken the 1 and turned it into 10, and one of them has taken the 1 and turned it into 5, and one of them has buried it. And so he then gives different rewards. So he gives all the same amount of money. He gives different rewards based on what they've done. Matthew's account, which is what we're going to be in, is Matthew chapter 25. This is, like last week, this is a parable that's really one in a series of 3. So last week it was the parable of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and then the lost son. And we looked at the lost sheep, and the big message there was that if you are not in a relationship with God, you are lost, and God is searching for you like a parent searches for a lost child, right? I told the story of when our youngest son was 3, and Sherry and I couldn't find him for a little while, and the absolute, the absolute all-encompassing, nothing else matters right now, I'm looking for my kid. And that's the message that we get out of these 3 parables together. We're now looking at 3 parables that go together. It's the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talent, and the parable of the sheep and the goats. And the message is not about God's love. It's about our accountability and upcoming judgment. So it's one in that series. And in Matthew, it's part of the Olivet Discourse. So with Luke, it was before Jesus got to Jerusalem. In Matthew, it's during Holy Week. So this is the Gospels, there's 4 of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We call them sometimes referred to as the evangelists, because they write these accounts of Jesus' life for one very specific reason. They tell us why they're writing it. I'm writing this so that you may know that Jesus is the Son of God, and by knowing that you may believe and be saved. You may be reconciled to God. So they don't leave it up for us to try and figure it out. They're saying, met this guy, turns out to be God, died for you, you need to become his student. You need to be an apprentice of his, because this is the way forward. This is what success looks like. You've got to follow in this path. So in Matthew's account, it is happening at the end, because most of the Gospels focus on the last week of Christ's life. They're not biographies in the classic sense of a biography. They don't tell us a lot of stuff. A little bit about the birth, a little bit when he's 12. Mostly it's the last 3 years of his life, and mostly it's the last week of his life. And in Matthew's account, we are in the last week of his life. And he's giving this big teaching, and the teaching is going, it's in response to the question that has come because he has told them that the temple is going to be destroyed. And so they have gone to the Mount of Olives. So we think that this is probably Wednesday night. We don't actually know. You know that on Sunday Jesus parades into Jerusalem. The big Palm Sunday celebration, he marches into Jerusalem. We know that on Monday he's teaching in the temple. We know that on Thursday he's going to be betrayed, and you're going to have, the Last Supper and the betrayal, and then he's going to be arrested, and then the trials and all that stuff. We don't have the day-by-day, hour-by-hour events of Tuesday and Wednesday. So at one of these days, probably Wednesday, I think Tuesday night he probably stayed in Bethany with Lazarus, but on Wednesday he's staying, they're sleeping, they're camping out, because all kinds of people, maybe 1 million people, have come to Jerusalem for the Passover. All these people have flooded, they've completely overrun the town. He is staying on the Mount of Olives, which is walking distance, although you got to be in good shape. If you take a tour of Israel, you generally stop as you're coming in. You stop on the Mount of Olives because it's a perfect place to look at all of Jerusalem, and the temple is right there. It's not there anymore. The temple's been destroyed, but the temple would be right there. And so it's close. You have to hike down the Kidron Valley, but you get there, you could walk. Jesus clearly was in shape. If you're walking where they're walking, Jesus was in good shape. But what we know is that he had been teaching at the temple, and he says it's going to be destroyed. And so then they go back to the Mount of Olives, and the temple is in the background, and the disciples ask him, and they say, hey, tell us, when is the temple going to be destroyed, and what will be the signs of the end of the age? Okay, so we call this the Olivet Discourse, and Jesus is going to teach them, and part of what's going to be included are these 3 parables. Parable of the 10 virgins, parable of the talents, and the parable of the sheep and the goats. So we are in the Gospel of Matthew, the 25th chapter, begin reading now in verse 14. Jesus says, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away." So remember, one of the first things we're doing in trying to understand a passage of the Bible is to understand what the original hearers would have understood. So this idea of a man, of some sort of leader going away with the promise that he's going to come back, would have set in mind to them Herod the Tetrarch. Because this had happened just a few years earlier. So you've heard of Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the king. He had gone away 30 years earlier, been appointed by Caesar to be king of the Jews. He'd come back, he'd ruled, and he had a bunch of kids, and he named them all Herod. The boys and the girls all called Herod. So it gets confusing, but there is a specific Herod, Herod the Tetrarch, who, when his dad died, goes to Caesar, goes to Rome and says, hey, my dad died, he was the king, I want to be the new king. Some Jews who were living there had gone to talk with Caesar as well, and they said, we don't want this guy to be our king. So Caesar had divided Herod the Great's kingdom into 4 parts, thus the term tetrarch. So this Herod the Tetrarch has a quarter of what his dad had. He's very mad about this. So when he came back, a man goes away, he's got a lot of power, but he disperses his power among people, and then he comes back. When he comes back, he had 3,000 people killed. He had anybody that he thought had undermined him killed. So there's this idea, they've got this idea of a person who's got power, who's dividing his power, giving some of his resources to people and going away with the promise that he's going to come back. In Luke's account, the NIV, I think unhelpfully, translates this, that the man said, until I come back. You've got this stuff. You've got some of my power, some of my wealth, until I come back. I think the word would better be translated because I'm coming back. So I'm giving this to you, and you better use it wisely because I'm coming back. and I will be looking for that. Translations are tricky. By the way, the NIV, we read out of the ESV today, English Standard Version, instead of the NIV, because the NIV just recently changed the word talent to bags of gold. So if you're reading in the NIV, it doesn't say talent, parable of the talents, it's parable of bags of gold, because the word talent in English refers to abilities, and that's not what is meant here. It is probably 20 years of wages. So it's a significant amount of money. It's 20 years of wages. So anyway, we are in Matthew, and he says that there's a man going away on a journey. They would possibly be thinking about Herod the Tetrarch because he had caused such havoc when he came back. But make no mistake, Jesus is talking about himself. So he is going away. I mean, he's going to be dead in just a few days, crucified. He will rise again from the dead. He will walk among his followers for 40 days, sort of helping everybody get ready, preparing them, helping them understand how he's fulfilled all the Old Testament passages. He's got to answer a lot of questions. And then he ascends into heaven. And the promise is he is coming back. So he is talking about himself. It will be like a man going on a journey who said to his servants, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Verse 16, he who had received the 3 talents went away at once. Okay, so notice no delay here. He got to work right away to invest what he had been given. He who had received the 5 traded with them, and he made 5 more. So, capitalism at its finest. He has taken what he's been entrusted with, and he's multiplied, taken 5 and turned it into 10. By the way, because whenever I make any comments about economics, I either get accused of being a capitalist pig or a socialist. I just want to say, I don't think I'm either. I think capitalism, shaped by Christian compassion, which sort of underlines what's being taught here, I think that's the best system we're going to get. I will say about capitalism what Winston Churchill said about democracy. Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other forms of government. And so capitalism has problems, but there's a lot that's good about capitalism. And so I'm not looking for your emails on my economic views. He who had received 5 traded with them, and he made 5 more. So also he who had the 2 made 2 more, but he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, verse 19, after a long time, so we'll pause here to note that many people think that the expectation was that Jesus would be coming back soon. And I just want to note that one of the messages we get from the New Testament is that it will be a long time, and that those who are not working shouldn't eat. I mean, there were people who thought that the most spiritual thing they could do is sit around and be faithful and trust God to provide for them. And Paul will write in 2 Thessalonians and say, hey, if you're not working, you're not eating. Get on with it. So we see that. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. So one of the things that I want to be sure you see here is the value of work. So work is celebrated. I am watching, like many people, watching rather closely the advance and the promises around AI. And I think a couple weeks ago, Elon said Nobody has to worry about AI. AI will do everything. Between AI and robots, all the work will be done. But if you want a hobby of working, you could do that. But everybody's going to have everything that they need. I'm skeptical, but okay. So I would say this to Elon, and I would say this to those who might think that that's a good idea. As a pastor, what I know is that people that don't have enough to do get in trouble. I mean, generally speaking, if you don't have meaningful ways to do something, that doesn't play out well over time. And that is because we were made to work. Now, we don't have to work to get paid, right? I mean, that's a different side of this. But we were made to serve. We were made to work. We were made to help other people. And we need to find ways to do that. And work, in that sense, is a get to. It's not a have to. We need that in our lives. So one of the main reasons, one of the main aspects of the Lake Light Institute, which we started a few years ago, pivots around celebrating work. It's recognizing the goodness of vocational service, all kinds of work, not just, quote unquote professional ministry work, but all kinds of work, teaching and medicine and business and all farming, all kinds of things. The value, the inherent dignity in doing this work. So Ben Dockery, who heads up Lake Light, has wrote about this in one of our newsletters a while back, and he noted that Viktor Frankl, who's the prominent, he was a Jewish concentration camp survivor, psychiatrist, who wrote, very famously, Man's Search for Meaning. And he, among other things, he said, look, we need others to love, and we need things to do. We need to find ways to care for and serve other people and to make the world better. We're searching for meaning. If we don't have that, then things unravel. And so he started, I guess this fund is still open if you want to contribute to it. He said, we not only need the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, we need to build a statue of responsibility on the West Coast. Because this idea that I want to be free from all responsibility, that doesn't work, right? Yes, we want freedom, but we want freedom that is shaped also by responsibility. So these are complicated topics, but I just simply wanted to underline this and to say that there is value in work. Now, in this room, perhaps I need to go in the other direction. I could go in the other direction and say some of you place too much of your identity in your work and overwork, and you look for your identity and meaning and purpose and friendship and transcendence and all those things that you ought to be looking to other people or to God for in work. But different sermon. Back to the text. He also went to the two-talent person. The two-talent person came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. So I think the important thing to notice here is this is the same commendation that he gives to the guy that made 5 talents into 10. The person that made 2 talents into 4, he says, yes, enter into the joy of the master. I'm going to come back to this in a second. Let me keep reading. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. Okay, so this is spin. He basically undermines his argument here, saying, you want what you didn't give. You're a hard man. We don't have reason to think that this guy is a bad leader or a bad boss. This person who had won and buried it in the ground is sort of, he's sort of playing a victim card. He's saying, you scare me. I didn't want this, so I just took it and I buried it. And he says, I know that you want what you didn't give. So by his own understanding, what he did doesn't work. I mean, I suppose you could imagine a scenario in which the world economy collapses and banks have been robbed, burying this bag of gold was the best thing to make. But that's not, this guy's just, he's lazy and he's irresponsible, and he doesn't act on the opportunity that's been given. And he says, you scare me, but actually he didn't scare him. I mean, if the master scared him, if he had an appropriate fear of his master, he would have been trying to figure out how to multiply what he had been given, because more was going to be expected of him. And as you'll see, what the master says is pretty damning. Verse 26. His master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the banks, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Okay, so I want to make 4 observations here. Number 1, we are stewards, not owners. So everything on the asset side of the ledger for us is on loan from God, and we are accountable for what we do with what is temporarily entrusted to us. The person I generally quote here, Abraham Kuyper, late 19th, early 20th century Dutch theologian who also founded the Free University of Amsterdam, was the editor of the national newspaper, prime minister of the Netherlands, and he was a theologian. And he wrote, in one of his famous quotable lines is, "There is not 1 square inch anywhere in the universe about which Jesus doesn't say, 'Mine.'" He made it, and he retains all rights. Everything that we have, minus our sin, is God's. And we are temporarily entrusted with his gifts, abilities, time, talent, resources. We are not autonomous. We think we are autonomous. We think we answer to ourselves. God says, "Nope, I made you. You are responsible, accountable to me. And I am going to audit you." More on that in a second. Point number 2. We are not the same. We have equal value, but we are different. Indeed, the master gave out different amounts of talent according to different abilities. So, since I'm already in trouble, I'll just keep going deeper. There's been a lot of discussion in the last 6 to 9 months about the edits that Ben Franklin made to the Constitution, and these edits were to what Thomas Jefferson initially wrote. And you have heard, famously it starts, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal." So what Thomas Jefferson actually wrote initially was, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." But Franklin, and both Franklin and Jefferson were deists. They weren't theists, they weren't Christians, but they were operating in sort of that Judeo-Christian framework. And Jefferson was appealing to God and saying, in God's eyes, all people have value and dignity and worth, and have equal value and dignity and worth. Right? And so we talked about this last week, and I said, look, the Christian worldview says that you are highly significant and greatly loved, deeply fallen, and in need of being rescued. But we are highly valued because we've been made in the image of God. So what Franklin does is he wants to turn this a little bit and move not appealing to God declaring our worth. He's appealing to sort of Enlightenment thinking. And he says, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Okay, but it's pretty self-evident that we're not created equal. I mean, it turns out Scottie Scheffler's a better golfer than I am. And Steph Curry's a better basketball player than I am. And we can go down the list of Elon Musk's a better engineer than I am. I mean, we just go down the list and say, people have different abilities. Now, to be clear, there's confusion here about whether we're talking about equal in ability or equal in value. So the Bible would be very clear that we have equal value. Ontological equality is what the philosophers would call it. We are all, because we've been made in the image of God, we have value because we've been made in the image of God. And I do worry, and I shared this last week, I said, I do worry that the conversation in the last 6 to 9 months has sort of shifted with some people, prominent secular people, saying there really is no such thing as human rights. Right? This is just fabricated. The UN Declaration of Human Rights declared that people had human rights, but they were wrong. They based it on nothing. They just said everybody has rights, and they go, we don't think so. We don't think there's such a thing anymore. So the Christian, the Jewish Christian Western vibe that has said all people have dignity is eroding. When you get rid of God, you get rid of the foundation, there's erosion there. Talked about that last week. I just want to point out that this parable makes it clear that different people have different abilities, which leads to the third point. God works this out in the end because there is an audit being done by a perfect auditor. Those to whom much is given, much is expected. Or to state this differently, if you were born on third base, you get less credit for scoring a run than somebody who's born with 2 strikes against them. So I want to remind you that the reward for the guy who went from 2 talents to 4 is the same as the reward for the one who went from 5 to 10. They both get to enter into the joy of their master. I think this is complicated, and we'll look at some more of this when we get into the book of Revelation, because there's a lot there about judgment. And a lot of people have a lot of problems with the idea that God is going to judge us. We think that that's just a non-starter. It seems patently self-evident to Jesus that we are accountable for our lives. And he just starts with that assumption. So we could go down this path. I think 1 Corinthians 3:8 suggests that we're not judged based on the results that we get. We're judged based on our faithfulness and our effort. But I don't want to lose our way here. So I want to say that part of what this parable is driving home is that we are stewards temporarily entrusted with God's resources, and that we will be judged based on what we do with what we've been given. And this judgment will be perfect. Now, some people will immediately say, okay, well, wait, I was pretty sure that you've said that our eternal destiny is shaped by a relationship with Christ, and that we can't save ourselves, and that we're saved by grace through faith, not of ourselves. It's a gift of God, not as a result of works. Like, the works don't matter, okay? Not exactly what I've tried to say. So I want to go back to this equation, that it is not faith plus works equals salvation, right? That is what many people think. If I believe in God and I do more good than bad, then I get to go to heaven when I die. That is not the Christian claim. The Christian claim is that faith equals salvation plus works. You got to have the works to make this equation balance. And so this is what James is talking about when he says faith without works is dead. He doesn't say the works save us. Our efforts do not save us. We are saved on the basis of the finished work of Jesus alone. But that kind of a saving faith leads to works. And so we see change in our life as the Spirit of God moves us forward. And we will be judged based on what we have done with what has been entrusted to us. Heaven is not a utopian communist state where everyone is equal. There are rewards for those who have been more faithful, more giving, the martyrs. I mean, we read, again, we'll see some of this in the book of Revelation. So, the point to understand here, Jesus is quite clear that there will be an audit and the results will carry forward. And so Jesus says to those listening, indeed he says to us, I am entrusting certain things to you, and I will be back and ask what you did with them. So I want to suggest, high level, there's two ways we get this wrong. Some people have been given lots of stuff, and crassly speaking, they just spend it on themselves. Like, I've got whatever, gifts and abilities and talents and opportunities, and I'm gonna do everything I can to make my life as easy as I can, okay? That's one way to get this wrong. The other way to get it wrong is to sort of do what this one talent guy does, and it's to bury it. Like to just not take any risks. So I'm gonna talk about that one. I'm gonna end with that one and just share a story about my risk experience. So if you've been here a while, 10 and a half years ago, I had a weird medical event, and it led to a dissection of an artery in my neck that led to a stroke. I had a brain stem stroke. So it wasn't left or right hemisphere, which is what most strokes are. It's a brain stem stroke. You have a brain stem stroke, your brain stem controls all these unconscious things, like blinking and swallowing and focusing your eyes and balance and breathing. So lots of people that have brain stem strokes die because their diaphragm stops working and they die. Obviously, that's not what happened to me. But I had no balance. And in the earliest days, Sherry was trying to reassure me. I'm lying in bed, and I'm scared I'm going to fall out of the bed. And she kept saying, you're not going to fall out of the bed. For one thing, you're strapped in, there's guardrails, you're not going to fall out of the bed. But I just had no sense of up, down, right or wrong, room would spin. I had no balance. And then, so it was a long recovery, and there was, I pretty quickly figured out that nobody wanted me to fall on their watch, right? So all the physical therapists, everybody was very cautious because I had zero sense of balance. And so I was, not allowed to get out of bed and get myself in a wheelchair, and I would get my hand slapped if I tried to do anything, I had to have this big safety belt on, and these physical therapists, for the most part, they were all 25-year-old young women, Amber and Tiffany, and they weighed, collectively they weighed 50 pounds, and they would always be saying, Mr. Woodruff, you can't do this, don't do that, you need to do the right thing. So this goes on for a while, and then one Saturday, the normal staff is gone, and there's this, there's a guy, he's 30, and he's setting up, I'm in a wheelchair, and he's wheeled me into this hallway, and he's setting up an obstacle course, and then he looks at me and he says, okay, walk the obstacle course. And I don't get up, and he says, walk the obstacle course. And I go, well, you gotta put a belt on me, and you gotta stand next to me. And he goes, yeah, I'm not doing that. Walk the obstacle course. And I said, well, look, nobody lets me do this, and you're sort of the weekend staff, and I don't know if you read the memos, but like if I fall, that's a big deal. Like nobody wants me to fall. And he says, I just finished my second tour of duty in Afghanistan. Do I look like I give a blank if you fall? Okay. He said, get your blank out of that chair and walk on this course. And I said, okay, I'm up. And I did it. And wasn't great, but it was a step forward. And I remember thinking about that, and I thought, so when did I become the guy that wouldn't get out of the wheelchair? Like when did that happen? That I was not going to take a risk. So what we're seeing here is people who, in this parable, it's like people who say, I can't take the risk to do that, to serve in that way, to give, whatever. They're burying what God has given to them. And the gifts that God gives to us, we see this in Romans 12 and 14, and 1 Corinthians 12 and 14, and Ephesians 4 and 5, and other places. The gifts that God gives to you are for the benefit of other people. You get gifts for other people. That's the way the kingdom of God is supposed to work. So, I don't know whether you have buried your gift or not, but I know that all the gifts that we're given, they're ours temporarily. God has plans in mind. He wants us to use the things that have been temporarily entrusted to him for his kingdom, his agenda, and there's an audit coming. So, as I said, this parable packs a big punch. Like, it is jarring to hear what I think is mine, what I earned, my stuff. You're telling me it's not mine? I'm telling you it's not yours. I'm telling you everything on the asset side of the ledger is temporarily on loan from God. And we are accountable for what we do with what we've been given. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for your patience with us, your grace to us, your word, that we just don't find wisdom and insight, truth and power in any other text like we find it in your word. Lord Jesus, we thank you for these parables that you gave us, and help us to see where we are bearing our talents, and help us to be those who live lives that will engender a response of welcome into my joy, good and faithful servant. Pray this in Christ's name, amen.